This was perhaps one of my most successful early videos. It was a very simple concept, my top 10 wish list for the future of Elite Dangerous. It's really hard to believe that it's been over 7.5 years since I made this video, so today I want to revisit it and see just how much the game has changed and see how well it stacks up against this old list. And whilst at that, why not add another top 5 wish list for the coming years? So at number 10 was space stations. Specifically, the ability to deploy stations and expand human civilization outside of the bubble. Now, back in 2015, space stations existed purely inside of the bubble, and it took some years for the first stations to be deployed beyond those borders. But today, the story is very different. Humanity exists in many locations right across the galaxy. Although this isn't quite the dynamic, player-driven colonization that I was hoping for, I still consider it definitely to be a hit. At number 9, I wanted to see horror remaps added into the game. Now right here is the old concept art from the Kickstarter days. I find these absolutely stunning even today. Now back in 2015, the game didn't have any horror remaps whatsoever. Today it does, although what's in the game right now is certainly far more functional than it is visually appealing. Moving on, back in 2015, it may be hard to believe, but passenger missions didn't exist. At the time, there was a lot of talk from both Frontier and David Braben as to just what passenger missions could deliver. In short, the concept was about dynamic missions, missions that would change along route depending on what the passengers may or may not want. And of course, it also meant the introduction of brand new ships, which at that point didn't exist. So yes, there was a lot of anticipation for the Dolphin, the Orca, and the most anticipated of all, the Beluga. Eventually, the passenger missions did arrive, but ultimately, I really do feel that they were far too generic and didn't live up to the lofty promises of the dynamicism that Frontier discussed. But nonetheless, passenger missions did make that appearance. An improved market. Now this is something I really wanted to see in Elite Dangerous. For me, true space sims are all about combat, exploration, and of course, trading. Right here, again, we can see concept art. This is what I showed in my original video, and it is concept art from the Kickstarter era. The market we have today and the market we had back in 2015 are nothing like what we see here. However, Frontier's promises of a dynamic emerging market do exist. Whilst it's true to say that it doesn't go anywhere near as close as a true simulated market that you may find in X4 Foundations or EVE Online, and it's also fair to say that Elite's market is built somewhat on smoke and mirrors, it nonetheless manages to do a reasonable job of selling the illusion that it is a simulated economy. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite tick that checkbox for me to successfully complete this part of the wish list, but nevertheless it's clear that progress has certainly been made. Now at number 6 we had dynamic missions, and at number 5 we had a dynamic galaxy. I'm going to talk about two of these both together as they kind of really do tie into each other. Now for me, back at the time, dynamic missions meant two distinct things. Firstly, branching missions that changed as you conducted them, so they'd have possibilities for different outcomes as well as different pathways. Very clearly a direction that Frontier didn't take. The other aspect of how I viewed potential dynamic missions would be the ability to affect the galaxy itself, so colonization and human expansion were first and foremost on my mind regarding this. Now today, things didn't quite plan out in that way, but we do have something very similar indeed, and that is the Targoid War. It's brought a dynamic aspect to Elite Dangerous that previously didn't exist, at least not quite in this way. Today, things are very different, and players collectively can certainly have their impact upon the galaxy. At number 4, I wanted to see improvements in exploration. Now this is something we have seen improved over the years. Back in 2014, we couldn't land on planets, we were stuck purely to space. So Horizons expanded on the idea of exploration quite a bit, and then the Beyond season, specifically with Chapter 4, overhauled exploration pretty dramatically, thus improving it further. In fact, exploration has been considered so good over the years that it sparked some of the largest community-driven events that Elite has ever had, namely Distant Worlds 1 and Distant Worlds 2. The first Distant Worlds rode off the back of all the new content added in Horizons. The second Distant Worlds rode off the back of all the new content that come in the Beyond season. So all of this did certainly deliver on at least a part of the dream. But back in 2015, I also spoke of space phenomena such as comets. These are still yet to make an appearance. Exploration then is something I'll be talking about a little bit further into the video. At number 3 was walking around, so the ability to get up out of your seat and walk around, space legs as it was known at the time or shortly thereafter. Now of course Odyssey did deliver the ability to walk around, but I think back at the time in 2015, the idea of walking around for me really was the ability to walk around inside your ships, as well as the ability to walk around inside the space stations. And in 2015, I specifically talked about walking around inside the rings of the Orbis and the Ocellus stations. So yeah, here's an area that Frontier certainly did deliver on, but not quite in the way that I anticipated. But whatever way I cut this, Frontier certainly did deliver on space legs with Odyssey and changed the game in a very dramatic way. It may seem surprising today, but in 2015, number 2 on my most anticipated features was Targoids. We hadn't seen them yet, although we suspected that sooner or later they would eventually turn up. In 2015, all we'd seen so far was the unknown probe, and it would take a few more years yet until Targoids would make their real presence felt. Today, of course, Targoids are having a huge impact on the galaxy, and it's very likely that in future updates that impact is going to be even greater. And at number 1, we had Planetary Landings. Now, little did I know at the time, but the feature was to be announced just 2 months after the top 10 video and would to be released later in the very same year. Horizons then allowed players to land on a whole variety of barren worlds, and at the time felt like the first steps to opening up many other new worlds. So as I look back at this top 10 list, this top 10 wish list, it's pretty interesting that Frontier did indeed deliver on many of those features. In fact, they delivered on almost all of them. I'd actually be completely lying if I said Frontier delivered on them in the way I was hoping and in the way I was expecting, but that was perhaps my expectations outreaching reality. Although, to be fair, I'm sure I'm not the only one feeling that way. At any rate, here in 2023, it probably seems a bit strange looking at big ticket features for a game that is at this point over 8 years old. It's very hard to say what the future will bring for Elite Dangerous. Big ticket items may or may not be on the cards for the game. And certainly I do think some of the community at least is pretty divided on how they view the future. Some appear to be more than content with the idea of smaller features and smaller fixes, whilst others still very much want some of those big ticket items. I'm not here to make a judgment call either way, but that said, I will take the step of making a new top 5 wish list for what I'd like to see in the future of Elite Dangerous. Before I get to that, I just want to say I don't think this list should be taken too seriously. It's just a bit of fun putting some rough ideas out there and hoping that just maybe one day they could be possible. At number 5, I have rebalancing and quality of life improvements. Now this might seem fairly minor to some people, but as far as I'm concerned, this is something that could have a significant impact on the game. In fact, it's something Frontier talked about a few years ago. They made this post on the official forums asking for feedback on various ideas. At the time, it seemed Frontier were going in the direction of every few months releasing a big update that would rebalance the game as well as provide some quality of life improvements. It turns out though, this was something that was relatively short-lived. We didn't get many updates or patches in this regards, and Frontier have gone very quiet on this specific information. Nevertheless, quality of life improvements and rebalancing are something that could take Elite Dangerous in a very nice direction, something the game really needs. I'm not going to put a list together of all of the different things we need because, well, that's going to be a bit too subjective, and I'm pretty sure that everyone will have their own list of features they'd like to see changed. But nevertheless, a big update focusing exclusively on all of this would be a very nice way to go. At number 4, we have the improvement of exploration. Now, I'll touch on this in the video briefly, and of course Elite has come a long way since 2015. We've had Horizons, we've had Beyond, we've had Odyssey, all of them adding various elements to improving exploration along the way. But there's always more that could be done. Personally, I'm still a big fan of the idea of adding a variety of space phenomena such as black hole accretion disks, comets, and potentially even supernovas, and many other things besides. Additionally, I'd like to see explorable gas giants so you can fly into the atmosphere and the big thick clouds that exist there. Sure, some of this, in fact most of it, probably seems unrealistic, but we can dream, right? Next up, we have my second most hoped for feature that Elite could have. That would be the ability to walk around inside spaceships. Now, some people will try and make a case against this idea. Some people will talk at you until they're blue in the face that we don't need spaceship interiors. But really, the idea sells itself. All it needs is a little bit of imagination and a little bit of thought. The fact remains that many other space games do have spaceship interiors. Of course, how we use those interiors will depend upon the style and the genre of the game. For example, Mass Effect and the Normandy. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Star Citizen and its multitude of ships. Elsewhere, we have X4 Foundations and of course the upcoming Starfield. Whatever the space game you look at, many of them feel the spaceship interiors are essential and they go out of their way to deliver some content for them. On screen right now, you can see some concept footage created by a YouTuber. Check out the full video, which is linked in the video description. They give a very good idea of just how decent and how good these ships could actually look. Ultimately then, the idea of walking around the ships is an extremely compelling one. And finally, still at the very top of my wish list for the future of Elite Dangerous is atmospheric worlds. Now out there in the vastness of space, there's a whole multitude of different planets, perhaps an infinite variety. It speaks to the vast potential that Elite could eventually offer at some point in the future. As it stands today, Elite Dangerous does have many wonderful worlds, but the truth is it is falling behind in the realms of planetary tech. Star Citizen offers up some gorgeous looking worlds. Microsoft Flight Simulator has perhaps the best looking world out there, a one-to-one recreation of the entirety of the planet Earth. Starfield, meanwhile, is offering 1,000 different worlds, and based on the limited footage we've seen so far, albeit this is PR material, these worlds also look very interesting and should be wonderful to explore. Whether or not then Frontier feels such a massive endeavour would be worthwhile is anyone's guess, but for me, it remains firmly at the top of my top 5 wishes for the future of Elite Dangerous. If you have wishes and desires for what you'd like to see in the future of Elite Dangerous, do let me know them in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. Meanwhile, why not check out this video that goes into some depth on what I'd like to see added to exploration for Elite Dangerous. Do check it out.